Record. Okay, so thanks for being here with me. My name's Jay Malone. I run a company called New Haircut, which up until a few years ago was a product development studio. And in around 2015, we discovered design sprints as the sort of our foot in the door with design thinking. And since then, I've been learning a whole ton about methods and frameworks like problem framing, like design sprints, doing UX research, learning the skill of facilitation, which is sort of the ground floor, which makes all of these really critical conversations possible. And so I've been organizing these events once a month. I have this problem framing AMA, which is just show up and ask questions, and I'm happy to answer as long as there are questions being fired my way. And then I also run a similar session on design sprints specifically. In the future, I may start to add some more different topics around research or just other areas around the space of innovation or facilitation or design thinking. For now, I'm happy that you're here with me for today's problem framing topic. So the way it works is that I've organized this board in Miro, which I'm looking at down here on my other screen. And the board is meant to be sort of like a place to capture the questions on a rolling basis, because what happens is most of the time people come to these sessions just to hear other questions that people have around framing, because maybe it's new or they're not really familiar with the context. And so I'm going to keep these questions freely available, and I record these sessions as you see. And what I do is I answer any questions that come up for this event, and then I go back and I find the snippet where I answered that question, and I add a little pink post-it next to the question. That way, if you come back, you can look through other questions that people have asked and go and review that answer without having to listen to the whole recorded episode. So I'm trying to streamline this and make it efficient. It's a little bit of an experiment. In the last event, I asked people if using this Miro board was a good idea. And most people said they enjoyed it, but they had missed it because it was sort of like stuffed into an Eventbrite reminder. So I've been trying to do a better job of just bringing more attention to this. It seems like it worked a little bit better. There's people that have been in here before the event doing some stuff. So if you just joined a little bit late, I actually joined 10 minutes late. I'm so sorry. I got distracted. No good excuse other than I forgot. And so what I normally do is I start by just doing a quick walkthrough of the problem framing toolkit that I've created. But instead, since I'm late today, I'm going to start with the questions. And then if anyone wants to hang around and is interested in looking at the toolkit, I'll just give a quick walkthrough. And then that's it. So without further ado, I am going to drag my questions up here. Does anyone have any questions about the process or any feedback that they wanted to share before I dig in? Yes, it would be nice to have a quick tour of the toolkit. Sure thing. Oh man, Chose, did I get it right this time? All right, cool. Chose was with me in another AMA earlier in the month. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna dig into these, and yeah, there's ways to just upvote. I've just left these +1s and smiley faces. So if there's questions, if you come back to a future one and there's a question that you feel strongly about that somebody else has already asked, you can just upvote it by dragging these little emojis over. So without further ado, Chose. Yes, I knew it wasn't Chose. Okay, Chose. Okay, let me take this first one up here. I'm just going to kind of work top down. Some of these, what's this one up here? Josh. Okay, I think this is from a former workshop that I never got around to answering yet. So instead, I'm going to take ones from people. I'm just going to add your name in here, Ryan. So that's in there. You could do the same for any other questions that you've asked so far. All right. Okay, so I'm here. If you're in the Miro board, sorry, if not, let me just put a link to that board so that everyone's in there. Okay. So I'm going to take Ryan's first question. Ryan asks, what are the best tools, resources you found on this topic? So on the top of Ryan, just want to make sure.
Yeah.
The topic of facilitation or the topic of problem framing?
Problem framing.
Yeah, okay. Well, so turns out there isn't as much information on problem framing. So what happened for us was the way that we discovered problem framing, it's not something that we invented for sure. We were running a sprint with a group. This happened a couple of times. One story that I tell over and over again is a design sprint that we were running with a group. We had spent a couple months with them sort of validating that they had something to work on there, right? They shared investor decks. They had already built 2 versions of this product that they were hoping that we could come in and help redesign and rethink. They had paying customers. So there was a lot of evidence to support that we should go and run a sprint on this thing. And then on the first day of the sprint, I wasn't involved in the sprint. My team was at the time. On the first day of the sprint, my team and I had a sync afterward, and they said, problem, we've completely invalidated their business model. So we're not sure what we're going to do tomorrow. That was a crappy spot to be in. And that is that's where sprints can fail, right? A sprint doesn't fail, of course, if you invalidate the ideas or you sort of pivot and go in a different direction. Those are great insights. But what does fail is if you got the wrong people in the room, you're working on a problem that the market doesn't really care about a solution to, or they have other solutions to it. And so we sort of signed up to say, we have to make sure that that never happens again, especially since we had paid to have our team members fly to go and meet the client. And we had sort of organized all of this. So it was messy. Luckily, we were able to find a tangent idea and run a sprint on that, but it was sloppy. So that was when we discovered that understanding and sort of unpacking the problem was something that we wanted to begin doing outside of the sprint, because the sprint is really about solution validation. Problem framing is about problem validation, 2 separate activities, really. Sometimes groups will run a sprint and sort of like squish those 2 things together. The problem with doing that is that you might not have the right people in the room. You may not be able to get access to customers or users to test your ideas out on, or you may, discover after multiple sprints that you're working on an unimportant problem, which is not what you want to invest your money on when you have people thinking about innovation and new ideas. So we started. There's a super long-winded way of saying that we kind of started from ground zero. We went and started looking at how people do discovery, how they do auditing, how they do market research and insights. And we prototyped a couple different lighter versions of problem framing. Just in the simplest form, we asked people to come together and to individually articulate what they thought the problem was that we were trying to work on. And then we would disappear and we'd go and do some research and validate that that problem was something important. Our goal was to get something that we could do in a half day to a day with the team, so that the team, together with some of the advocates and some of the stakeholders and customers, could all decide together that this problem was one that they wanted to move forward with. And so slowly but surely, we started to piece together different parts of the conversation that we wanted to get accomplished and sort of like clearly articulated, so that when we ran design sprints, our goal initially was like, we want to make sure that we have a clearly stated problem statement that's important, worth solving, so that when we take it into a design sprint, there's total conviction and confidence that we should move forward with this. So, there's resources out there. You can certainly Google problem framing. There's a good talk that was done. I'll link to this in the notes when I upload this video to YouTube. I'll link to this video. There's a 7-minute talk or 4-minute talk by, I can't think of his name, but I always play it in my training workshops. A professor from IIT who talks about abstracting problems because it's rare that you go from problem to solution in a straight shot. You sort of have to abstract the problem. And he talks about Apple's ability to abstract the problem in order to discover the need to build like the iTunes store, and how they eventually got to the MP3 players and sharing music and all that. So there's lots of there's courses, there are lots of short videos. There are people that talk about the importance of understanding the problem before going into solution mode. There's the double diamond design process, right? Which, like, that first left diamond is all about problem discovery and definition before you get into solution mode. So it was just a combination of doing lots of research and watching from others, and then slowly but surely piecing together a process. So it definitely didn't happen overnight. I don't, the shortest answer to your question, Ryan, would be, I haven't found any. I haven't found a course that says this is problem framing, this is how you do it. And that's really hard because problem framing is highly contextual. So a lot of the questions that I get are, what will it look like? What will the conversations be? What should we figure out? Who should be in the room? And a lot of that depends on the context of the problems that you're trying to solve, or how you're using framing. Is it to define a vision, or is it to really sort of find an opportunity within a space that the company is already sort of immersed within? So it's one of those strange topics there.
Yeah, that's helpful. I'd love to check out that video too. And I think, yeah, that's kind of what I've come across too, is just there's not really a common language for how to talk about framing, which probably makes it more confusing because different people, different firms and agencies are using different terms for it. Like, the principles are pretty much the same, but it can get confusing with different terminology.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great quotes that we've stolen and used over the years. I can't remember all the people's names. They're on slides somewhere buried in the decks that I have. But like, the problem is we don't understand the problem. Learn to fall in love with the problem before the solution. So all those things, that's all sort of the thinking and the emotion behind why problem framing is a great tool and really important. But I will link to that video. Okay, thanks for that question. Okay, let's take another one here. Okay, we got a huge question being formulated up there. In the meantime, let's find the next one. Okay. How do we keep this one from Jill is about the facilitation guide. So when I do a quick tour at the end, I'll show you what Jill was asking. What is the facilitation guide inside of the toolkit? I will answer that. I'll show you in a minute. In the meantime, let me see, what else do we have? So some of these questions, when I first started, I just left them in here. They're from past workshops that I actually ran with teams, and these are some of the questions that I left behind. So I want to prioritize the ones of people that are here today. This one looks like it's got some good activity. I don't know how to up. Yeah, no worries, just drag this +1. Okay, what is the most simple advice? I'm sorry, who asked this one? Marj, is this yours? I just want to make sure who you guys can just add to this post-it here. Just let me know whose question this is so I can address you later. Just add it to the end.
Hey Jay, this is Marj. That's not mine, but I +1 it, so because I'm interested in it.
Cool. Okay, so somebody can just add their name down to the bottom there. I'll leave the dash for you. What's the most simple advice or most helpful questions you'd ask to help someone problem frame rapidly? Okay, the prototype of problem framing is to carve out 30 minutes before you're going to dig into like an ideation session or some co-creation workshop. The prototype of problem framing, because my problem framing process today, the formal comprehensive process I use takes me about 8 hours, which is about 2 half-day remote working sessions. And so if there's no wiggle room or time or budget for the group to do that, then I just stuff in a very simple activity where I invite the group to individually and silently write down what the problem is that we're there to solve. And the way that I do it is I follow a structure, and my problem statement structure, which I didn't invent either, I just borrowed it from elsewhere, is who's experiencing the problem, what's it all about, when is it happening, so what's the context, why is it important to solve, both to the user, the customer, as well as to the company, and how will we measure success? How will we make sure that we're tracking in the right direction? And I invite people in the room to individually answer that, or to individually articulate that and follow the structure. And then one at a time, each person reads. And often there's a lot of apples and oranges input going on, meaning that one person is talking about one persona and another person is in totally different persona, different market, or a couple people are articulating the problem very, very differently. And just inviting the group to do that often is enough to slow them down and back them up back into the problem space, or to minimally allow them to brainstorm that problem together and to say, before we jump into sketching and ideation or whatever we're going to do next as far as solutions, let's spend 30 minutes making sure that we're all aligned on the problem. That's like the most rapid fire way I can get a group to do any sort of problem framing activity. And like I said, often it's enough to alert them to the fact that we're here to solve a problem and there's a little bit of misalignment or misunderstanding, or that the problem has sort of been living in one person's head, but the rest of the room isn't really sure why they're there or what problem they're working on. And so often that's enough. It's good enough. It's better than just pretending that we all know what problem we're there to work on, which is ironically never the case. So again, if this Marj, Rebecca, Ryan, Shuman, or Jose, just let me know whose question this is so I can add it in there at the bottom. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Ryan, let's take this one down here. What are all the terms you utilize to frame? For example, problem statement, challenge, vision, long-term goal. Wow, the words associated with problem framing. And let me just, I think this is yours, Ryan, because you were.
Yeah, it is.
Cool.
So a perfect follow-up from my other question.
Yeah, I know two words that I use interchangeably when it comes to problem framing are problems and opportunities, because current problems are future opportunities, right? If you look at them that way. And that's what problem framing is really all about. You're looking at the current pain points and challenges that people have with today's experiences. And you're looking for opportunities to improve or altogether innovate those spaces, those steps, those activities, or the entire experience altogether. And so that becomes an opportunity for the group to then work on. So problem and opportunity, I tell people, you're going to hear me use these words interchangeably. Vision is another word that comes in, especially at the start. So here's the use cases, I guess you could say, of how I see groups using problem framing. It's sort of, it's very polarizing. Either there is a vision, there's a North Star, and there's a new big opportunity, there's a theme, right? We have success in this domain, we want to move it into another segment. There's a new application of technology, right? So like, how might we take advantage of AR, VR, or something like, there's some like emerging tech that they want to take advantage of. So there's a North Star to get there. And now they want to use problem framing to unpack and identify all the different opportunities, and then eventually figure out what is the one opportunity we want to go after first in this domain, following our vision. That's one use case for problem framing. The other is that it's more of a greenfield application of problem framing, that like a senior leader might say, we're feeling the pressure, or our existing products and services, like we're feeling a bit of pressure from the competition, or, we're not getting the return that we used to on this, the engagement has dropped off, whatever it is. We need to get the group together to figure out where there are new opportunities, but there's not much of a vision other than we need to make more money, or we need to save, or we need to grow, something like that. It's a bit abstract in terms of the vision. And sometimes that feels very disempowering to folks that are put in a room to figure that out. So in those cases, I would use framing to help shape the vision, right? So you could run it once through. This also works when you don't have senior leadership's buy-in to do framing. And you're asking for some direction and some vision, but they're just not willing to sort of like carve out a day to do a visioning workshop. So you could get the team together and set the expectation up front. Hey, we're going to use framing to figure out the vision for the team, things that we're excited about. And then I or whomever will take that back to the senior leader and tell them these are the things that we identified. These are potential opportunities. And have them sort of reverse engineer what they think the vision is, that and making sure that that aligns with what they're investing in, with what the other senior leaders are excited to invest in from a company standpoint. So vision is certainly one that comes in. Those are the big ones. I think there's probably a million other words if I really sat and unpacked it, but problems and opportunities and vision. Also research, maybe if we just talk about research. So many times when you're doing framing, there are these opportunities where you realize you're not as well versed in a certain space and you have to pause and go and validate what the expertise in the room with the actual people experiencing the problem, your stakeholders, your customers. And so research becomes this, there's a close relationship between framing and research, because a lot of the time it's a new space, there's unfamiliarity, you're really kind of like unpacking the space to begin with. So you have to, you should set the expectation up front that you may design a one-day problem framing session, but you may quickly I realize that you don't have the expertise in the room, that you have to go and talk to the market. And so you're going to pause, you're going to go back, do some research, and then you're going to come back, share what you've learned, and continue the framing process itself. So take the pressure off yourself to nail framing as a home run on the first shot. Thanks for that, Ryan.
Cool. Like the simplicity. Yep.
Yeah, I wish it was simple. Framing is so hard. There's definitely some anxiety I feel every time I'm about to lead a framing workshop. Cool. Okay, so let me do this so I can start to pay attention to what I answered. I answered that. Oh. This one. How would you explain? Okay, I see Marj's question. Cool, let's take Marj's next. How would you explain where problem, I'm down here for anyone that's following along. How would you explain where problem framing and design sprints fit into design thinking? Well, okay, so design thinking, there's like some classic verbs that go with design thinking. Understand, empathize, maybe those go together, ideate, test, all things like that, right? So like a design sprint, I always say is this, is one recipe of design thinking. It's highly structured, it's really compact, less than a week long. It gives you like sort of a cookbook of classic ideation design thinking. Design thinking can be used in lots of different ways, though. Design thinking can be used to understand, like, to diagnose communication issues between two departments, right? It doesn't always have to be some product or service that you're creating. But if you are, design sprints, especially product sprints, are a sort of a great recipe to practice and diagnose a problem and treat it with some potential solutions that you want to prototype and put in front of people. So the relationship between design thinking and design sprints is I refer to design sprints as one recipe of design thinking. Problem framing is a little bit different. Problem framing is more of a strategic conversation. Really, you're asking the problem, what problems do we want to solve for the market that we're serving, or a new market that we're interested in exploring? And so it's more of a strategic conversation that you're asking, like, what questions are important for us to ask and understand before we move into something like a design sprint. So problem framing, certainly it happens earlier in the process. you're asking the right questions, you're trying to figure out who you want to solve for, you're trying to understand what their current experience looks like. And once you have some clarity and you have a good working, clear, articulated problem statement, then that is the foundation baseline to run something like a design sprint. So in the simplest form, problem framing is something that happens early on. Design sprints, if you're looking for a framework or a recipe of design thinking to ideate different solutions, then you would move from your framing into your sprints. My problem framing process that I use, here's the relationship between it and design thinking. I use the principles of design thinking in order to create my problem framing workshops. So for example, I have moments where the team is allowed to think quietly and divergently, and then come back and brainstorm as a group. What else? It's very customer centered. So I bring research and insights from the customer so that whatever problems we think we're interested in solving are rooted in actual pain points and problems that those people are experiencing, right? So it's customer focused or human centered, right? So I bring principles like that to design how I lead problem framing workshops. So that's the relationship that I've created between framing and design thinking. That's funny. I just found, I was doing some cleaning, office cleaning. I guess it's spring cleaning, right? And I found this book from Jeff Gothel. I can't see. Yeah. So these are always interesting questions that come up. How do you compare lean versus agile versus design thinking? I wrote an article a long time ago called, I'll link to it in the book here, and I'll link to Jeff's book, Marj's question. Jeff's book and my article. I wrote an article a long time ago a couple of years ago called Design Sprints versus Agile Development Sprints, because our initial interest in design sprints was to improve our product development process. But I'm a software engineer and product manager. So the first time I heard design sprint, I was like, wait, development sprint, like an agile sprint, or what are we talking about here? So I wrote an article to help people understand the difference and the relationship between the two. So I appreciate these questions. Thanks, Marj. My article. Yes. I'll link to that. Okay. And let's see. Oh man, I just realized that I haven't been sharing my screen this whole time. Okay. That was a mess. How are we doing on time? I think we can keep going. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, here's one from Rebecca. I'll try to answer Rebecca's and then Josh's, and then I'll do a quick tour, and that'll be our hour. Okay, so Rebecca asks, I'm up here, team and stakeholders. I'm a finance person. We are not always popular. How do we ensure everyone has an equal voice, especially when our voice may well be a negative one? Oh, I see. So Rebecca, it sounds like you might be invited into a problem framing workshop, and you're there from a feasibility standpoint, right? So you might be saying, what's the timeline on this? How much is it going to cost? We don't have, we would have to invest in additional resources, people, things of that nature. Are you asking, like, how do you best participate when that's what you're being invited to talk about?
Yeah, I think so, Jay. I mean, it's because we as finance people, we're trained to ask the awkward questions. And I do find when we're looking at these kind of design thinking approaches, it is quite aspirational, isn't it? People come up with all these amazing ideas. Actually, at the end of the day, somebody's got to pay for it. and our role is to make sure we don't waste money.
Yeah.
So I do get the feeling sometimes that our voice is not so equal because it's not so popular. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I mean, I think that your voice at this early stage is super critical because, like it's early on in the process. So as a facilitator, what I'm doing is I'm making sure that people understand why they're joining, what the expectations are, where we might go next. If there's some success here, what we might do next is do a little bit of prototyping. So what I'm trying to do is help the team understand that this isn't make or break. We're going to spend a half day to a day on this. We may work on one problem and then a week or a month from now, learn more about that problem and decide to not work on it anymore. But this is all very iterative. So now's the time to have the right people in the room to make sure that this is a problem that there's commitment from leadership to invest in it. It aligns strategically with the kind of impact we want to have, as well as the effort it might take. So part of one of the activities that I do in prioritizing a problem is to do an impact versus effort. And that would be a great opportunity where I would especially invite you to talk about any constraints around budget, or maybe we would do that even earlier in the conversation. And that way, whatever opportunities are being presented, there's already alignment between technology, budget, people that you want to solve for, market, right? So the more that you can constrain the conversation, the less disappointment there is later. But it doesn't mean that things aren't going to come up that the group is really excited about. And then my engineers in the room, legal and compliance, I'll have those people in the room and I'll invite you to say, what should we be thinking about? Or what are some of the constraints that we need to really pay attention to before we go further outside of this 4-hour conversation that we're having? Because I consider the opposers and the challengers in the room at this early stage super critical, as opposed to finding out a year from now. That's when you coming in and kind of cutting it down to saying like, we don't have the budget for that. That's when the team would be like, why didn't we know this way earlier in the process? So I think the facilitator should make sure that it's understood that this is a very early or iterative conversation. And this is the time for us to learn about budget constraints and things like that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jay, because often, finance doesn't come into the room until way down the line, and that's why we're unpopular, because we do come in and squash it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that last part. So this is where groups that are sort of new to ideation sessions or any kind of like workshop type setting, they're used to having all the designers in the room, or all the engineers in the room, or all the marketers in the room. And so like the reason that design sprints in particular became so interesting was because it talked about this cross-functional group of people. And I remember running a sprint at Papa John's, and I forget I think she was a controller. And she came into it, she's like, I've never been in a workshop with all these people having these conversations all up front, all at once. She's like, this is the way that I want to run my organization from now on. It just takes a little bit of courage from the facilitator standpoint to say, we're going to have all these different people in the room. So they have to be smart enough to know who to invite into the conversation. So, and maybe, the first couple workshops, they don't even think about legal and compliance and all that. They're like, no, that comes way later. So they just have to understand how to pull on those people at the right time, just to make sure that the conversations don't go way off track versus actual expectations.
Thanks, Jay.
Okay, and then I said there's a bunch of unfolds here. So let's see. I'm going to answer Josh's. This will be the last one, then I'll do a quick toolkit tour. What are the best people? Who are the best people to have join a problem framing workshop? This one is always, I've left it in here because it's a question I get a lot, and it's hard for me to answer because it's highly contextual. So you want, in the simplest way to put this, I'm actually, wow, Ryan, I just thought of an answer to your question. I'm actually recording a a course on problem framing, which is going to be all about like these ground floor, what is problem framing? Why is it important? What happens when we don't do framing? Who should we have in the room? What does it look like? I'm recording this as a course with Envision. They have a new venture that they're creating called Learn. And we're unpacking one of the questions or topics that I'm going to talk about is who to have in the room. And so there's two sets of people. There are the individual contributors who have some expertise around the problem or the space or sort of like the theme of what you're trying to explore, right? These might be people that have built products or services, that have marketed, that have like been on the front lines with customers working in a call center, for example. So these are people like deep experts in this space, and you want them in the room. And then you need the authoritative people. So the people that have the larger vision for where things are going. They know what the vision is for the company. They might have talked with Rebecca and they know like general financial commitments and constraints. They have the power to move these ideas forward, because what you're doing is you're saying, okay, we've identified an exciting opportunity or problem, and the next step is we'd like approval to move forward with this. We want to start prototyping ideas. We want to do some more research, right? So you need that person, that champion, to help you approve and move those ideas forward. They may not be in the room with you, in which case you can interview them and have their voice sort of as a proxy. But ultimately, you're going to need to take whatever ideas come out of this and get it approved as a business case and move it forward. So lots of expertise in the problem space, at least one or two champions and executives, like directors and VP levels that have the larger vision for the company and for whatever this theme is that you're working within. A facilitator, for sure. It's a really, really hard conversation to have. So I highly recommend using a facilitator. And the only other constituent that you may bring in are actual customers. So if you can design in moments to interview those people together, and if not, then you can pause and do some of that research separately and then bring that back into the room. But those are basically your three constituents. You have like the executive team that's in charge of funding these ideas and has the larger grand scheme of the vision. You have the people that will move those ideas forward inside of the team. And then you might have one or two people that can really share their unbiased view of what that current experience looks like for them, because they're the ones experiencing the problem. So those are the three groups of folks. And I hope I have even more to share in this course that I'm creating. So without wasting too much time, let me just share with you my toolkit. So the pitch on the toolkit is that I used to run a lot of training workshops, and a lot of people would ask me, can I have can you share the deck? Those templates that you put on the screen for a half a minute, can I have those? And I used to always say no, because it was like a life's worth of work and it wasn't included in the training workshops. And I also, after running lots of workshops, I realized that there's this, have you ever heard of the hero's journey, right? There's this moment in the workshop where you get really excited and you're like, oh my God, I want to take this back. I want to share it with the team. And then you realize that it's going to be really hard, or you're not sure how to take what we did in this safe workshop and apply it to the context of the work that you're doing. And so you feel like this big disconnect between what you learned in the workshop and your actual day in and day out. And so for all those reasons, I thought, what if I could give people all the resources that I use to do framing, to run sprints, and teach them at the same time? And I came up with the word toolkit because I saw other toolkits, and I thought it would be this good intersection between training and resources and actionable templates. And so that's what the toolkits became. I created the problem framing toolkit was the first one I created because, to Ryan's point earlier, I didn't see any materials or courses dedicated to framing. And then I wound up and I created a toolkit for design sprints as well. They work really well together, but they can be run separately, of course. The starter versions, just ignore that. I don't I stopped offering the starter versions for a number of reasons. So the toolkit itself is hosted in a platform called Podia. And so what Podia allows you to do is you pay once for the toolkit. That's it. You don't pay, it's not an ongoing fee. You pay once and then you get access to all the contents in the toolkit. And inside the toolkit, there are instructional videos. So as you're going through, as you're getting situated with framing, getting familiar with what framing is all about, how it's going to look and feel, and how to use this toolkit. So there's some videos on that. And then there's also videos on the 9 different steps of my problem framing process. So I coach you through each of those steps. So those videos you'll stream directly through your browser through Podia. And then there's a whole bunch of resources so that you can take the learning and make it actionable. So there's a facilitator's guide. That is a walkthrough, a step-by-step, minute-by-minute walkthrough of when you're doing this step. This is what you should be expecting the conversation to look like. These are some of the activity. This is the activity. This is what it's going to look like as the group starts to produce some ideas related to this activity. This is where you should be at the end of it. This is how much time you should spend on each step within the activity. And so that's the facilitator's guide. Just because we're short on time, I'm not going to show you what it looks like, but that's what's included. There's a presentation deck. So in the background, as you're facilitating, I have slides that I use to share with the team. So they know that we're in this part of the process. This is the activity that we're doing. This is what it's going to look like, just so that they can follow along. The facilitator's guide goes 10x deeper so that you know as the facilitator what's going on. What else is in here? And then there's all the digital templates. So in both Miro and Mural, let's see. So in Miro, it comes with 4 templates to do the problem framing activity. So there's, the way it breaks down is there is pre-work. So there's team pre-work to get the team acclimated and getting ready for the framing workshop. There's also a discovery template in here that I use as I interview stakeholders and gather up all my research beforehand, and then I share that out with the team so that they're coming into the conversation ready to have that to get to dig in. Then there's a template for the workshop itself. It looks complex because it is. There's a lot of steps in here. Right. And what else is included is down here are links to all of the the related resources. So for example, as you're doing step 1 in the process, there's a link to the instructional video, the pages in the facilitator's guide, and where you should be in the team presentation deck. So it's kind of like breadcrumbs to make sure that everyone's in the right spot. That is a super quick overview of the toolkit and what's involved. Let me just make sure if there's nothing else. And then there's a whole bunch of additional resources. So again, back to Ryan's question, what else is out there? So Ryan, this is the video I mentioned. So there's, as I picked up resources and courses and white papers or videos that people have created, I've just, every time I find one, I put it back into the toolkit. So this toolkit, it's kind of like software, because it's a live, continually updated resource. As I find videos, as I create new videos, I put it back into the toolkit, and every time you go back into it, you'll see all the latest and greatest. So that's the toolkit. That's what's involved. If you guys have any other questions, I know we're almost at the end of time, so let me stop sharing. If you guys have any other questions, I'll put my email in the Zoom chat down here, and I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, thanks so much. Sorry I was 10 minutes late, but thank you for being here, and I hope to do another one in April. So if you have more questions, come back to the one in April, and I'll see you then. Thanks, y'all. Thank you.